9 reasons why the left lives in a very broad-reaching delusion. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and a few days ago we finally found out that, surprise, surprise, the Mueller investigation turned up nothing, which means that there is essentially no possible way that Trump colluded with Russia, but of course, it hasn't stopped them from already doubling down, and the brightest presidential hopeful calling for the full report to be released, while some throw Mueller under the bus for not succeeding in his anointed mission, while they accuse Barr of orchestrating a cover-up.
That report needs to be made public.
Yes.
The American people have a right and a need to know. The underlying evidence that supports that report should be made public.
Yes.
The Attorney General Barr should be called to testify under oath before the United States Congress.
Absolutely.
And the White House should not be allowed to interfere in any...
Now, Attorney General Barr was selected with bipartisan approval, and while it should be said that he does have a history of wanting to encourage an investigation on Hillary Clinton, making it inaccurate to say that he isn't biased, though granted it's a bias any sane and informed person should ethically have, he still has essentially zero reason to try to somehow hide the contents of the document from everybody in our government. So I say, let the Democrats see it. The sooner the better. Let's be pragmatic about this. Barr has nothing to gain by lying about evidence hidden within the full report, and everything to lose, because the trials of every person subpoenaed were as public as they ever possibly could have been in any alternate dimension, so telling such a lie would be basically impossible to get away with in the first place. But more so, if the Democrats managed to essentially halt politics from 2017 through 2019, imagine what would happen to an individual once they got their petty mitts on the full document and that individual was lying about the contents. Unfortunately, I predict that if Trump gives over the full document, the Democrats will probably do literally everything they can to stall the congressional analysis of the report, saying they have found things that warrant further investigation. They'll refuse to tell exactly what those things are or what they are investigating, and the media won't report on their ongoing clerical work until the 2020 election is over, so they can come up with a new manufactured scandal or finally retreat and re-strategize. See, I'm fairly positive I know exactly what is going on here, which is that this is simply the next leg of the Democrats' pre-programmed, internationally coordinated, political and media complicit strategy of trying to undermine the Trump presidency in every way that they possibly can, so that they'll continue to have ammunition going into 2020 designed to make people think that he stole the election and everybody hates him. You know, because there's little kids in concentration camps. To be perfectly truthful, a lot of this strategy was released in the form of a leak of a document from David Brock, the head of the company Media Matters, in which he basically goes into depth about the propaganda strategies that the Democrats would be going on to employ, complete with training 40,000 people to essentially act as resistance trolls on the internet, whose job it is to find a way to delegitimize the statements of anybody who actually tells the truth. There's a lot more in the document, and I suggest searching for it, though it might take a while, but having looked at it a while back, I can assure you that the Democrats have never once surprised me since 2017. But now that I really think about it, I should really go all the way to the beginning of when and how the Democrats began collectively brainwashing Americans into a self-enforcing hysteria of paranoid, magical thinking that doesn't correlate with rhyme or reason. Somehow, it's entirely okay to believe Trump is still magically guilty after 2 years of public trials that turned up nothing, while Jussie Smollett was suddenly cleared of all 16 felony charges with basically zero explanation, and to them, it means that it's another case of police being corrupt instead of the politicians and activists in Obama's hometown. That all being said, the first step that the Democrats took to create this alternate reality started back when Obama was running, as he was well backed by George Soros, who not only donated generous sums to Obama, but hosted fundraising events in places like Manhattan, which undoubtedly generated a major portion of his 2008 campaign. One of the things I think must have been stated all through the 2008 election, though I honestly can't remember well enough at the time, is not only that everybody in America must only be not planning on voting for Obama because he was black, and that makes them racist, but much more so, that being black was a disadvantage, as opposed to the literal only thing Obama had going for him, as his entire political history before becoming a senator was in the post-communist left, and he used to hang out with Louis Jews Are Termites Farrakhan. Clearly, considering the fact that Americans were willing to vote for the hack as if they had no idea about those things, which I imagine most of them didn't. I mean, I voted for him, and I didn't, while not caring because he wasn't a Republican, coming out of the Bush years. Considering we voted for him anyway is probably proof that the Democrats already knew that people would be more likely to vote for a black guy, and thus were already attempting to gaslight and make Americans paranoid by saying, everybody in red states are racist. It was a lie from the get-go, which they undoubtedly propagated for political leverage, especially considering there were high-ranking black officials working with the Republican Party, such as Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell. So when it turned out that the Democrats were eagerly using this strategy to smear Obama's plentiful Republican critics, and the Republicans could only complain about their treatment to entirely deaf ears, well, we should have been listening. But I, for one, was a fool, and I forgot to hear both sides of this story, even though that's such a basic rule.
If he had been anything other than African American, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on African Americans, but he would have been impeached and convicted by now.
He would be impeached if he weren't America's first black president.
The second way the Democrats very calculatedly cut off almost the entirety of their supporters' ability to relate to the thinking world was another thing that they had been doing for a very long time, which was no platforming, smearing, and trying to make it some sort of moral violation to even listen to any conservative, libertarian, or even centrist speakers at any given moment. I think once they realized just how effective it was to call people racist in Obama's America, and they realized that basically everybody on university campuses and in far leftist urban meccas legitimately believed that being a Republican was akin to being in the Democratic Party founded KKK. I think once they realized that stuff, it was easy as hell to convince activists and the blue checkmark class, not to mention university students, to do everything they could to ruin the careers and often the lives of anybody they felt like, or, at the very least, get them thrown off a social media platform, while of course, no such things happened to the Democrats' favored children.
But Antifa is now, they have a flag. They've had a flag since the Soviet, Nazi Germany in the Soviet era, and they've brought it back. There are specific groups that I'm not going to mention by name that have specific names, and they sell merchandise. They've appeared in various news outlets. They've expressed their desire to use violence to suppress speech.
Is it a centralized organization the same way that I hear you on Proud Boys, but like where they have like tenets that are written out and there's a leader and like...
The third thing the Democrats did to create the alternate nightmare world that their followers still live in to this day was to overturn the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, thereby legalizing the usage of propaganda on the American people and making it perfectly legal for the government to pay outlets to peddle circular logic, one-sided information, or downright falsehoods. And this happened in 2012.
Well, it made almost no headlines, and yet a major piece of legislation was quietly signed into law a little over a week ago. President Obama signed a bill that allows the U.S. government to combat foreign propaganda by creating its own. Let's take a look and give it a reality check.
And of course, the result was fairly obvious.
Black on black crime isn't a thing.
Regardless, I have a whole video about that, so I'll move on after I mention that I believe they jumped to a full-speed propaganda tactic after the numerous more subtle ones, once the Occupy protests were well underway and it looked like the citizens were very unhappy with the sitting administration. The fourth way the Democrats helped create, or rather enforce, this blue pill world they had created in their sinister laboratory of horrors was to begin demonizing logic and reason. Stephen Hicks noticed this as a more general tactic of far leftists who embrace postmodernist philosophy as part of their political arsenal, which I think is absolutely worth noting.
But the other option then is to say, I'm going to believe what I want to believe. There's no way I can give up this beautiful, deep part of my identity. And that means that I have to find some way to get rid of the logic, the evidence, and the commitment to reason. That I'm going to elevate a subjective commitment to something I want to be true over reason. And we do know in the history then of religion that there are many religious strategists who take that route. Limit reason, crucify reason, set aside reason in order to rejuvenate personal faith commitments.
However, I think a number of you can think of a number of examples of this type of thing if you think long enough, and I'll give 2 examples of my own. First would be the demonization of explaining things coming from, mainly, men and white people, with the words mansplaining and white-splaining. Now, by the time these words actually started being used, unironically, by people I actually knew, I was starting to be pretty darned red-pilled. But it didn't occur to me until later that the same media outlets that helped to popularize these terms were undoubtedly the ones funded by DNC cash, and they were undoubtedly doing it to help disconnect people from any harsh realities that might come as a result of one half of the human population explaining things, or the racial majority of people in our nation. Clearly, if you are cutting yourself off from information from all white people and men in the West by openly saying that you'll refuse to listen to any logic or reason, and you don't want to hear from any of those people, you're already entirely deluded in a way I don't think that I could ever dream of becoming, because as stupid as I've behaved in the past, I never had the ability to shut out reality based on somebody's immutable traits. The other thing I really noticed coming from the left this decade was a newfound interest in demonizing conspiracy theories, undoubtedly coming from the urge to cover up numerous legitimate conspiracies that came from the Obama administration and the Clinton campaign, such as the legalization of propaganda on the American people that they didn't want us to know about, the massive drone wars, and Bernie Sanders being robbed of the nomination. Even more than that, they pushed extra hard on delegitimizing news sources they don't want you watching, like Fox. And while this is something I always remember leftists doing, they encouraged people to believe that it was totally normal to say, Fox News is all lies, without investigating in the least. So if you end up with people saying things like, man, CNN is pretty bad, but at least it's not as bad as Fox. You sure? I've actually noticed that Fox is more likely to be reputable these days. When was the last time you watched Fox? Oh, please, I'm not gonna watch faux news. I'm not an idiot. So, how do you feel qualified to claim that everything on Fox News is fake news if you can't even remember the last time you watched it? Tucker Carlson has a pretty good show. You mean the host Antifa has identified as a fascist? I'm blocking you. This is basically just an example of circular logic. This is true because I think it's true, and the reason that I think it's true is because somebody told me that it was true, and since you don't believe that it is true, it must not only be true, but you also must be a terrible person, because you seem like a terrible person to me because you argued with something that I believe wholeheartedly must be true. When people have been so thoroughly conditioned into performing doublethink and other types of completely irrational trains of thought long enough that they start truly believing that the world doesn't make any sense, at least compared to the way they believed just a few years prior, the people become literally unable to distinguish logical and rational thinking from dishonest, agenda-ridden, repackaged political talking points from wackos who need reality to be incorrect in order for anybody to ever bother taking them seriously. Believing in all of these types of alternative logics in practice turns people into being completely okay with lies, such as how it's racist to have hairstyles that somebody said was racist, that women always tell the truth, and that people should be judged by their immutable traits legally. Otherwise, it's systemic racism. When they've been conditioned to think that this is normal, they also become more likely to lie constantly to forward their own commitment to this type of illogic, which makes their social reality into a cesspool of constant lying. The fifth thing I have noticed the Democratic Party and their media machine engaging in a lot recently, which I think they've probably always done, and Republicans have certainly been guilty of in the past, is trying to make absolutely juvenile arguing tactics appear to be completely normal, often by endlessly shifting the goalposts and rewriting recent history so that we barely even know what they are actually trying to say, because when people successfully debunk it, they'll switch to a new narrative every time, claiming that's what they meant the whole time, or something. This has been more than evident throughout the entire Russiagate saga, starting from the beginning, when they first said that Russia hacked Clinton, and then said it was Russian collusion, citing absurd conspiratorial claims like the PP tape. Then eventually, when it came time for the investigation to be over by everybody's standards, they shifted to obstruction as the new narrative, and now I'll just play a short clip of Styx Hexenhammer 666 because he's smarter than I am and says it well.
The cop-out is that the Democrats are saying, well, that's because it's Barr. That's because it's a Trump appointee. I don't think so. The Attorney General usually acts with pretty great latitude. Now, weren't the Democrats a year ago saying that all of these people, Attorney Generals, FBI heads and stuff, couldn't be compromised? They were inevitably good. They could never be leaned on. There was no corruption. There's no deep state, no anything like that. But all of a sudden, Trump, I guess, found the one person that was willing to be a slimy AG. And Barr, of course, not someone who is universally liked even, among maybe the more libertarian tenets of maybe soft Trump supporters. But that doesn't mean that he's corrupt. And so, and then they give out the report, and they're like, well, it's not, this is just an outline. We need every single bit of the report. You are never going to see every bit of the report. It would breach the Fourth Amendment to disclose personal information about people that weren't indicted. And it would, even people that were indicted, but then the charges didn't go through. Like they keep talking about the fact that, 34 or 36 people were indicted. Okay, not all of them were successfully prosecuted. Some of them, are still, I think, in a gray area. Isn't Flynn one of those? I think they indicted him, but they haven't, dragged him through the court yet still or something. I don't know. I sort of lost track of that case. And then a lot of those indictments, none of them have anything to do with Russian collusion. Most of them are on lesser charges, like Papadopoulos. He lied to the FBI. He spent 2 weeks in jail. He's counted among that number, but is that a significant crime? No. Is it related to the probe itself? No, it's related to, in the course of that probe, he said something that was false or misleading to the FBI. That's all it is. Who fucking cares? It wasn't about anything substantial, and if
the relentless and downright aggressive argumentative subject changing reminded me of a clip from the protest in which Jordan Peterson first got really famous.
I think that's a foolish question. Look, if you want to know what my views are...
I've watched all of your videos, yes.
Including...
Yes, I have.
Yes. Then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
Apparently,
all of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
Like, do you want to disavow... I have 150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay. Do you want to disavow the support... Could you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
So, I have 150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really think that you're worth all of that time?
You see, while I know all sorts of people do this, the contemporary left makes it a habit of doing such things. Once they are beaten on one conversational front, they'll change the subject immediately and entirely to double down, as if nobody will notice how completely insufferable this behavior is, or as if there won't be eventual political and social consequences for acting like this. But you see, they can't be bothered to think about such consequences clearly, as they believed it was a good idea to put the word mansplain in the Oxford Dictionary, as if that will help Feminism Incorporated's PR every time feminists try to deny the fact that they're a female supremacist movement. When people have been conditioned to see the world in such a way, to think that just changing the subject constantly is normal when you keep losing the debate, they are no longer able to even remember what rational discourse even looks like, due to the fact that they have been bullied into accepting that obvious irrationality is just how things are, and that rationality around most subjects should be demonized, and thus, again, lying becomes normalized, and telling the truth becomes a radical act. Reason 6 that the left was able to create a dystopian alternate reality for their followers was by combining a number of these tactics, mostly with propaganda, to get Americans and people all over the world to legitimately believe that Trump is a racist, and that he's anti-LGBT, often by trying to convince people that walls are racist, which literally makes no sense, and over-exaggerating the perceived slights against the T's in the LGBT to use to say that Trump must therefore be homophobic, even though he is extremely pro-gay male if you actually learn about him, which I should make an entire video about. Reason number 7 why the left has been able to demonize the current state of things is with both idealizing a hypothetical political alternate reality entirely, where everything would be much better if Clinton had won, such as by creating this website that still posts articles designed to basically paint the picture of a fantasy utopia ruled by Queen Hillary Clinton, while others even begin to throw Obama under the bus more and more, which I've noticed mostly on a social level, you know, on Facebook and stuff with people I kinda know, where far leftists suddenly say that they dislike him, but also from well-publicized polling data like this. I think the important thing to keep in mind about this is that although Democrats are an almost entirely corporate party now, they do operate with many sentiments presented first by the Communist Party of the United States, which is why an idealized future will always seemingly be just on the horizon, but they'll have no problem turning on their own leaders who didn't get us there, at least with sentiment. Reason 8 in the list of reasons that I believe the left cannot bring people into the less unpleasant land of the real world is that they've done everything they could to create as many self-fulfilling prophecies as they possibly could. I mean, when you spend about 7 years straight telling people that all white people are racist as a very common sentiment, should anybody be surprised if a few more white people end up becoming racist as a result of the fact that they know they'll get accused of it anyway? Worse, of course, is people like ContraPoints, whose video Decrypting the Alt-Right now watches as a line-for-line description of literally everything the Christ Church criminal referenced in his manifesto. And though I will be making a whole video about this topic, I think it's really a pretty disgusting thing that this person has done by fear-mongering in such absurd and unfalsifiable ways.
After all, I'm not a fascist is exactly what a fascist would say.
You see, in the video, ContraPoints undeniably played right into the hand of the alt-right poster boy, Richard Spencer, and other such people, by telling an extremely wide internet audience basically that, yes, it's true, every innocuous-seeming small signaling of tribalistic, supposedly fascist dog whistling that is rumored to exist, such as Pepe the Frog and the dairy product milk, is actually the true sign of a real fascist. And centrists who say that these things aren't dog whistles for fascism are clearly way stupider than I am. No Contra, even if you magically ended up being correct about a few things regarding one of the recent terror attacks in the West, you still said a lot of demonstrably untrue or duplicitous things in that video, but much worse, made the completely unforgivably moronic mistake of adding more legitimacy to previously joking alt-right dog whistles by making alt-right people think their plan was working, as it was fooling at least you enough to make a video that 1.1 million people watched. You see, if the battle over memes was left between the centrists and the alt-right, the centrists would have easily been able to reclaim Pepe the Frog back from his new alleged mascot status of the alt-right, as he was easily the most popular meme on the entire internet with both leftists and right-wing people, simply by emphasizing that Kekistan is supposed to be a union for persecuted internet users that happen to innocently share memes, which is what most people said that it was when it first became a thing. However, once you opened your boot-licking smug mouth, Contra, at least a few 100,000, or likely far more people, ended up legitimately believing that Pepe the Frog and the OK sign were hate symbols, and centrists like myself felt like it was a good idea to distance myself from such things, while alt-right true believer wackos might very well have looked around the internet and thought, well, there's a lot of us, and thought it would be a good idea to commit that heinous act. That, or maybe ContraPoints is legitimately working with the alt-right to help popularize their memes. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some association, not likely directly between Contra and any figureheads, but perhaps maybe the people who I imagine fund Contra's videos and organize Contra's PR might also have a few ties to the alt-right. Just saying. Reason number 9 why leftists live in an alternate reality is that I imagine they probably have mostly made a lot of stupid decisions on behalf of their political leanings, and they don't want to give up on the belief that it must have all been worth it. Think about it this way. What if you were somebody that took out over $100,000 in student loans to study sociology and now can't get a job? Wouldn't you want things to go back to the way they used to be before 2016 so that you had a chance of at least getting a blogging career going while driving for Uber on the side? What if you were gay and told everybody that Trump was a homophobe, only to realize that he loves gay men and that Democrats seemingly hate us and prefer our enemies, feminists and Islam? What if you were one of the people that actually unfriended literal family members on social media and likely cut off contact with them entirely, all because they did something that leftists think is racist? Leftists who, remember, think that having dreadlocks is racist. What will happen when these people come to terms with the fact that they did just about the worst thing you can possibly do to a family member short of physical abuse, all inspired by propaganda? Can you imagine the feeling of humiliation they must get? Clearly, if you also had to finally face the music that the Democrats are the historic party of white supremacy, the current party of downright racist and completely sexist identity politics, not to mention homophobic ones increasingly, that the Democrats are the more Wall Street-oriented party, that they started more wars over the past 20 years than Bush, that they pay media outlets that you trust like NPR to lie to you in much worse ways than Fox has in over a decade, and so many other things. Imagine how much that would burn to realize. It would be quite a lot like this, I imagine. You see, everybody has noticed that leftists don't even try debating anymore, and it's been like that for at least a year, at least in terms of what I've noticed. Instead, they jump straight into bullying tactics, such as completely uncalled for and often entirely untrue insults, online gang-ups to essentially make it look like two or more people are laughing at a sane person, or they play victim with obviously contrived histrionics. Personally, I think they do these things as well as holding out for a miracle, such as hoping that Trump will still be convicted of being a Russian agent. That will obviously never happen because they know they've already lost. But you see, everybody else they know is also pretending that the emperor is wearing clothes, and that I guess she's the perfect Hillary Clinton or something. But since they know they'll be called a fascist for admitting that Hillary, or I guess now Kamala Hairspray, is totally naked and has a rather unattractive body to boot, they'll just try to beat you down for telling the truth, because they figure that if they join you by telling the truth, they'd be beat down by the people around them. And that's likely true. But, of course, if everybody just told the truth, there'd be nobody left to beat people up. I just hope we can get there before it's too late. If you appreciated this video, please donate to my PayPal. I'm trying to currently raise about $900 to finish the next episode of my animation, The Culture War is Lit, Episode 2, and make sure to follow me on minds.com, comment if you have something to say, and share with anybody you think should hear this. That's all.